Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Scott. Welcome back to part 2 of Internet Facilitated Sex Crimes. Thanks for sticking with us. We were completely unaware of how long the episode was. So this is part 2, and stick around. There's a lot more information coming your way. Thanks so much and enjoy the show. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking through this very difficult subject with us.
All right, let's move on. So we're going to talk about who these guys are a little bit more. And I emphasize who because
see what you did there.
Scott is going to talk about that in a moment. But so the backgrounds, generally, they do not have a prior criminal history. So these guys are really flying under the radar. But when we ask them and or polygraph them, they do actually self-report. 55% of them self-report, yeah, I actually have touched a kid inappropriately in real life. They have contact offenses in their history that they have not been caught for. And then 50%, especially of child sexual abuse image predators, offenders, they do meet the criteria for pedophilic disorder. So, I always get that comment, well, everyone who downloads child pornography must be a pedophile. And actually, no. So it speaks to what we were talking about before. About half of them meet the criteria, yes. And the other half is like what we were saying, individuals either out of curiosity have downloaded it and looked at it, or it's in, a cache of other types of pornography that are legal. So yeah, that's sort of the breakdown of who these guys are. And we're going to get a little bit more into their cognitive thinking patterns in a moment. But first, Scott has a little case study for you real quick.
So one of the examples that we'll talk about, which has now happened so long ago that it's sort of disappeared from the public vernacular, but is very fascinating, is that of Peter Townshend, who is a British musician. He's known for his more than 50-year association with the seminal rock band The Who. That was our little snarky clue earlier. He's a co-founder and leader, principal songwriter, guitarist. He was also secondary lead vocal, I believe. And The Who is considered to be one of the most important and influential rock bands of the 20th century.
Oh, yeah.
He is incredibly prolific. He's written more than 100 songs for studio albums. He's done concept albums, as well as doing, I believe he's actually done background music for film and television as well. I mean,
I think so.
Composed those. He plays, I don't even know how many instruments. I mean, I know he's a keyboardist, but he also plays banjo, accordion, harmonica, ukulele, mandolin, violin, synthesizer, bass guitar, and drums, and he's self-taught. So he plays plays all of these instruments on his own solo albums, and he guest records with other artists. So, I mean, we're talking about literally a near genius level of musical artistry in this individual. And back in 2003, he was taken into custody in Great Britain, in England, where he is a citizen, because of the Protection of Children Act and for the possession of child pornography. And I think he had one image, and his excuse was that he was doing this, he was searching the dark web for these images so that he could better understand what had happened to him, that he had been molested as a child, and he was researching for his autobiography, and he wanted to use his book as a discussion for what he felt like was his suspected abuse. So there's also some controversy about whether or not he actually experienced it or believed it, or it was a supposed quote unquote recovered memory type of thing.
Right.
But then he reported to the police that he became so enraged by looking at these images that he was going to take it upon himself to expose these criminal enterprises.
And that the British banks were accepting credit card payment.
Right. This is before you could get stuff for free of that level. I mean, or maybe you could if there was a way to find it. But, the main thing that tipped it off was that, he made a 7-pound purchase. I think 7 pounds back in 2003 was probably about $12, $13 or something. So he gave his credit card information to this company in order to get these images.
And
So
folks, don't ever take it upon yourself to start, you know, exposing people or starting these investigations on your own. Just doesn't look good.
yeah, it doesn't. And it also doesn't. I mean, there's a fine line between madness and mastery many times. And, for someone who is so high level, when you find mathematicians or musicians who are at this level of talent, there is a tendency to find in these individuals the ability to go into a zone which completely shuts out the rest of the world. And that can also influence their thinking. Right. Is it possible that he got on this one-man mission crusade? It's certainly possible. It's not very likely given what we know about the nature of these offenses, but it is an interesting argument. So in the end, he was cleared of the worst of the charges because he didn't actually download any images. And that would have been, at that time, it would have been a maximum 5-year jail sentence in Britain. So he didn't download anything, but it really, really did affect his career for a while. Huge scandal. Now, he's an incredibly wealthy man, and right. Money will make a big difference in any kind of court proceeding. And I will hasten to say this, that whether or not, whatever his intentions were or his motivations, that anybody else who would have been charged with the same thing in the same situation would definitely have not gotten off.
Yeah, for
like
sure.
him.
For sure. And so I don't know how they do it in Britain, but he was actually put on the sex offender registry for a while, at least, because he refused to go to court on it. He said that, he wasn't going to go to court to face these charges. And so something hinky happened. He gets put on the sex offender registry. And then in, what was it, 2010, the Super Bowl was in Florida, I think. And The Who was playing the halftime show. And I remember around that time that there was an organization that, advocates against the, excuse me, abuse of children. And they put out these sex offender advisory flyers around Florida with Pete Townshend's face on it saying,
wow, I did not know
he's a registered sex offender. He's coming to the United States. He should actually be taken into custody. I have a picture of it that I usually show in my presentations. But it's so funny because when I do this presentation for usually like law enforcement and talking about the psychology of sex offenders, I have like my top 6 excuses that people would use. So I just want to read those to you real quick. So 6 is I accidentally downloaded it. 5 is it came in a bundle with other legal porn, which for every case that happens, there's somebody that hears that and goes, oh, I'm going to use that excuse too.
Yeah.
4, it just popped up, kind of a double entendre there. 3, strangers are emailing it to me. I remember hearing this and just being like, wow, that's so weird. Like,
how did they get your email address?
Yeah, no one's ever accidentally like mailed me drugs. That is so weird. How number 2, it turned into an addiction and I just couldn't help myself. And then number 1 is always, I'm doing research for a book or I'm doing research into my own victimization. I can understand the pull to really wanting to understand if you were a victim of child sexual abuse, wanting to find answers. And it might even be less scary to sit behind your computer and do some research rather than go see a therapist or, learn about it in other ways. But there's so many other ways of gaining information at our fingertips rather than going straight to something like this. There's just so many other ways to look into this information that is available online. You don't have to go look for child pornography. Right. You can look at research. You can look at books. You can join a victim support group. But
yeah, his excuses are along the lines of what you gave, and he had supposedly, you know, gone to the site and seen something so horrific, and it's, you know, it was a Russian site or Eastern European site where an infant was being horrifically abused. And he picked up the phone and was going to call the police, and then thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't. And he called his attorney, and supposedly his attorney said, don't do anything.
Oh,
Which is very interesting. I mean, because that's all hearsay. Any attorney worth their salt would be, um, wipe your computer, destroy your computer, cover
right.
your tracks, and don't ever do this again. But yeah, so it was a pretty weak story.
Yeah.
And at one point, I mean, things got really bad for him. He was paying about $3,000 a day for security at his homes, because he was just, you know, people were really going after him. And it's also interesting, like he got into a lot of flack because he refused to stand in front of the judge. I mean, he
Right.
like who who gets to do that? Who gets to say, well, yeah, I'm for whatever reason, like, you know, F you, or I don't feel comfortable going in front of the judge, or I'm ashamed. Nobody gets to do that.
No,
Nobody gets to do that. Nobody's above that. So yeah, you have to.
exactly.
So that is an interesting case of someone who, I mean, he's in his 70s. And now it is really ironic and interesting that that topic is in one of their most seminal works, which is Tommy. If you've never seen the rock opera Tommy, it's an amazing stage show. It's also a really amazing movie with Oliver Reed and Anne Margaret. I mean, it was done in the early 70s. I mean, it's mind blowing. No, it's 1969. Yeah, 1969. It's really disturbing and amazing. It's about this blind, deaf, and mute teenager who is molested.
Right. Who has a history
I'll
of
fix
that.
that I'll fix that in editing.
No, it's fine.
So he had visited this before, but you know, we don't know if there's necessarily a connection between that. So another case that I wanted to bring up, which is a lot more close to us, you know, in chronological time, is an utterly charming and very talented young man, Mark Salling, who is a series regular on the series Glee. If you're into musical theater, or you're into show choir, or just bitchy Ryan Murphy shows, then Glee was a really great show. Yeah. And he played this sort of this character Puck, who was sort of like lower SES, sort of like from a low class family, who was really sort of becoming a better person. He was a jock, but becoming a better
jock, but kind of the bad boy.
And becoming a better person through, you know, engaging in this show choir. And the reality was that Mark Salling, had an assault charge on him from a former girlfriend. And then in 2015, he was found with about 70,000 images of child porn on his computer.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. That's a lot. And that's a problem. That's like there's no talking your way out of that. And Mark Salling was not able to endure what the results of that were. And he killed himself, which
before basically he was prosecuted, right?
Right, before he could be prosecuted. So, you know, that's something that was also a big part of what Dr. Shiloh and I did at this forensic site. Was we had a program that was called Pretrial that was supposed to, you know, prevent people from killing themselves. So it was, just for the details, on December 29th, 2015, Mark Salling was arrested here in Los Angeles on suspicion of possessing several thousand photos and videos depicting child sexual abuse. And it was after they got a tip off from one of his ex-girlfriends. And so he got out on a $20,000 bail, which is really low. But the police were able to generate a search warrant, and they found 50,000 images of child pornography. And they were downloaded between April and December 2015. And they were on his computer. They were on flash drives. and he was charged with receiving and possessing those images. So,
Wow.
his career immediately tanked. He was moving into working in features, and he was immediately removed. And then on January 30th, 2018, he was found deceased, a suicide by hanging, near his home in an area of Los Angeles that's sort of up in the valley, after he had been described. Someone had noticed he was missing for about 6 hours. So, yeah.
Right. And pretty typical of what was starting to happen when there was this big explosion in these types of cases, and the prosecution started coming through. As we've probably mentioned before, a lot of these individuals, so we already talked about them having no criminal history, but there's such a variety of backgrounds, meaning people with families, men with good jobs, standing in their community, no criminal history. So this is the first time they're ever facing the criminal justice system. A lot to lose. And overnight, and maybe long-standing for some of them, becoming suicidal.
Right.
And so the Federal Pretrial Services Division excuse me, was seeing a lot of suicides or attempted suicides. And so they partnered with essentially the company we were working for to say, what can we do for these folks so we can get them to face the charges and stay alive to go to prison, essentially. And so we would do it. It was basically anxiety and depression management, and we would put them in a group with each other, and they would talk about going through the process. And so it was supporting them and their mental wellness while they were going through the process. It was not sex offender treatment because they had not been convicted yet, so we weren't even going down that route. It was really that, and then prepping them to go to prison, wrapping their mind around what that was going to be like,
what to expect. And what was fascinating was doing a pretrial group with people that were there on federal charges versus state charges, because then you were like, well, shit, I got to explain to them the difference between club fed and the state prison. And there's a radical difference. I mean, federal prisons are much easier to tolerate, even if you're going in as a sex offender, versus a state prison. I mean, it's a very, very different environment.
Remember, we'd have people come in and be like, oh my God, I watched Locked Up this weekend. And we're like, no, don't watch that. That's like state prison. You're freaking yourself out beyond what you need.
Yeah.
But I still do a bit of that pretrial work in my private practice, because I just found it so fascinating to really, work with these individuals where they're at and not even really touch the sex offender stuff, and just get them ready to go to prison.
So moving on to what goes on in the mind. I mean, besides the fact that there is a possible paraphilic motivation, of the possible presence of pedophilia or hebephilia, there's a thought process that goes on, an overlay, which we call cognitive distortions. And so when we talk about cognitive distortions, we kind of have to lay a groundwork for what we call the implicit theories. And so implicit theories are what we would say about people's belief, their belief about their understanding of the nature of human attribute. And then not only belief, but then the meaning that people attach to these beliefs. So when we focus on sex offenders or child molesters or pedophiles, the research shows that people have implicit theories that really focus on children as sexual beings. And that's a really hard nut to crack. I mean, and Shiloh and I have both been in that situation where you're really having to explain to someone that, no, the child standing in front of you wearing the nightgown is not flirting with you. Right. They are not seeing this as a potentially sexual situation. And but that's an example of a cognitive distortion, but that cognitive distortion, that error in thinking, is based on this implicit theory of children being sexual beings.
And you'll see that if you go and watch that documentary Chicken Hawk, because
Yeah, perfect
it's
example.
not necessarily specific to like one situation like Scott just laid out, which it totally can be, but is their overall view of like, no, children can have sexual feelings and engage in sexual behavior, and it's not harmful to them. I wish everyone else would wake up and sort of understand this. So that's some of the rhetoric that you would hear.
Yeah, that part is jaw dropping. You're really good at explaining Dangerous World. Do you want to touch on Dangerous World
Yeah, so
theory?
Dangerous World is another theory of cognitive distortions that is exhibited. And I hope I get this right just off the top of my head, because it sort of has two prongs to it. And one is, okay, if I am someone that is sexually attracted to prepubescent children, it's sort of me against this big dangerous world that is wants to shut down the way that I think. And so it is my job to protect that, as well as protect these children that I want to engage in these sexual relationships with me. So it's an us against them. And I need
Right.
to show them the way. I need to sort of groom them. They wouldn't use that terminology, but be loving towards them and show them that this is okay. And
Like, oh,
essentially start.
I'm a good person, and so I will protect them from I'm a good person who wants to engage in these actions. I will protect them from the bad people who want to engage in these
Yes.
actions, which is just mental gymnastics, complete mental
Oh my
gymnastics.
goodness. Yes. And it's interesting because we talked about this in the Mary Kay Letourneau case, because we see this with female offenders who feel like, they have to sort of teach the teenage boys that they're victimizing about love and sex. And it comes from this nurturing place as well. And so that is one of those cognitive distortions that goes on for men and women that we've been able to see.
So then there are two more. So right there, those are, of the four big ones, there's children as sexual beings, the dangerous world. Then we have another one called uncontrollability. And uncontrollability is sort of this a cognitive distortion, a maladaptive defense mechanism of this is outside my control.
Yep.
Like I don't have any autonomy. I don't have any agency to control these thoughts, these feelings, these beliefs, these actions. It's really not my fault because I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I find this one interesting because we see this with sex offenders who also assault adults, like serial rapists. They will also use this excuse. Um, so it's to say you don't have any control over your behavior, especially when it comes to involving a victim and harming someone else, again, is just a really twisted way of thinking.
But for me, the one that probably, I don't know, all of these are disturbing in their own way. For some reason, I get really triggered by this last one. But the last one is the nature of harm category. And nature of harm is that it's no big deal. It's not really hurting them. I mean,
Right.
it's just sex, and it's just sex with a kid, and I'm being gentle or whatever. They'll get over it. It's not that big of a deal. It's this real callous disregard for the safety of the child.
Right, whether it be physical or psychological harm that's happening. So some examples of what we would hear clients say would be, um, well, the victim put it on the internet, so why is she a victim? I heard this one all the time. This 16-year-old takes naked pictures
Yeah.
of herself and puts it on the internet, and now I'm the bad guy, like it's my fault. She clearly has some stuff going on. Or maybe they wouldn't even say that, but I would try to get them to think about, okay, why do you think this girl is putting this on the internet? What is happening with her? To build that empathy. Um, I'm not physically harming a child. I mean, I'm just looking at pictures. I'm not the guy with the camera. I'm not the one doing it. Oh God, I would hear, well, I'm not looking at the violent stuff.
Right.
Actually
Right.
the pictures I'm looking at, the children are smiling. It's not like they're crying, or they don't look like they're being forced to do anything. I mean, that that is so hard to wrap your head around, but it gives me as a clinician something to work with because then we talk about, well, why do you think they might do you think there's someone off camera threatening to harm their family if they don't do this? That maybe they're drugged. Maybe, all of this, like, let's do some critical thinking here to see what's going on
Right.
beyond just what you're seeing in front of you. Um, and then I think you and I have also heard the excuse of, especially like someone who has come to terms with identifying as being a pedophile, well, this gives me an outlet so I don't go out and harm a child. Like almost like harm reduction.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out if I know because I want to, you spent a decade working specifically in this area, and I had not researched this particular point, so I'm going to throw it back at you because you probably know. What is the jury still out, or is there definitive?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I think it might give us a visceral reaction at first, but if you sit and think about it, there's always these battling theories of, okay, let's say someone comes to us and says this. Does it pacify the urge, or could it be building up the urge to where they're like, this just isn't going to do it for me anymore.
Right.
I have to go out.
Are they reaching saturation, and then they're going to escalate their behaviors,
Right.
which,
Right.
I mean, we do have proof of that when it comes to, when we saw the progression, we worked with several individuals at the site that you could look on a chronological history and see that they started out with fairly normal exposure to porn, and then they were going to Barely Legal, which was a somewhat legal site, and then from Barely Legal into corners of the dark web, into violence, into
Right.
infant images. So we saw a progression that
Right.
we can really go, okay, well, this is an example of someone who reached saturation and was constantly trying, like a heroin addict, trying to chase the dragon's tail, get something more and more stimulating.
And that's where the most research goes into, because that's the ultimate question, right? Is this creating is pornography and or illegal pornography going to create hands-on contact offenders? Because
Right.
that's what everybody's scared of, right? So there's still research, tons of research going on in the area. I think that also comes up, and I don't want to open up like some other deep, dark rabbit hole here, but with the child sex dolls, that get produced in Asia,
Yeah.
people say this is keeping me from going out. It's actually it's satisfying my sexual urge because this is my sexual attraction, and then I have less urges to actually go out and create a victim. So yeah, it's some uncomfortable stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So stepping on to the next section is just giving a little more information. We've been using the term cognitive distortions or thought errors.
Even though you can't say the word.
Cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions, thought errors. They're just, for just a real basic explanation, they are ways that our mind can convince us that something is true that actually is not true. And interestingly, the inaccurate thoughts are usually used to enforce or instigate negative thinking or negative emotions. It's sort of that inner voice that can be benignly malicious to malevolent in how you think about yourself and think about the world around you. And interestingly, if you Google, the 15 top cognitive distortions, there are really great things that come up. And for people that are into self-help, you're like going, oh yeah, when I get stressed out, I fall into black and white thinking, or, oh yeah, I generalize, or, oh, I personalize. But what you don't see is a lot of, so those articles are all about helping you break those cognitive distortions that affect you. And what Shiloh and I are talking about in this instance is the opposite, is that these cognitive distortions allow these offenders to justify their actions and their
Right.
behaviors.
Exactly.
So in filtering is a very common cognitive distortion where you filter out, let's just say, for the person who is trying to improve themselves and they're like, I'm tired of having negative thoughts about myself, because all I do is I filter out all the good stuff and I just ruminate on the bad stuff about myself. I ruminate on the way I look. I ruminate on the way that I interacted with my boss yesterday. But in filtering for someone who is a sex offender, it's that they would do the opposite. They would filter out all the possibility of harm that they're doing.
Yes.
And so then that leads into sort of those 4 points that we said earlier, is that, well, no, I'm not doing any harm to this child. It doesn't really harm them, but in engaging in this behavior, I'm protecting them from something worse. So jumping to conclusions, emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is when I feel that way, so it must be true. And we saw this in our group therapy sessions with these guys. We're like, no, this is the way I feel. And the Greeks and the Romans were doing it thousands of years ago. And it's like, and then you have to break down like a whole history and anthropological cultural discussion about, no, that was a different culture.
Right.
And it was absolutely not what you're talking about right now.
And these cognitive distortions for most people aren't just coming out of nowhere. When they are offenders on the internet, they're also talking to each other and creating communities online, especially those that are more pedophilic, and like with the organization NAMBLA. I mean, they've created a community where they have literature and conventions because they're the North American Man-Boy Love Association, and they feel like that should be okay and be legal. And so it's now an echo chamber of building up these cognitive distortions that are getting reinforced online, and or if they're part of these organizations, which you would see if you watch, again, Chicken Hawk, because it follows a few NAMBLA members.
So yeah, I mean, and using that example, there's one that's particularly jaw-dropping, and I can't remember his name. I just remember that the horrible
sweater,
Cosby sweater he wore. Which how ironic is that? All these years later, it's like, oh, right? Another sex offenders wear 80s, early 90s sweaters. But one of the cognitive distortions we would talk about, it would be negatively biased recall of social encounters. So when an individual ruminates of like, oh man, I tried to talk to that girl and I just made a complete ass of myself, and I was talking and like I just wouldn't shut up, and I was talking about this dumb thing, and now she thinks this, blah 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 blah. So let's flip it, where that the sex offender in certain situations incorrectly, positively biases his recall of that social encounter. And if you watch the documentary Chicken Hawk, you will see several examples of this. There's an example where this guy, who he is a proud member of NAMBLA, and he is, just the cognitive distortions. I mean, he's even having what we call euphoric recall, talking about some of the incidents. But they show him interacting with these 3 teenage boys in a rural area, I think of Virginia somewhere. And he has this interaction, and then he turns to the camera and he said, did you see how they were flirting with me? Did you see how that boy pulled up his shirt? He was flirting. And clearly the kid was not flirting with him at all. The kid didn't even recognize him except as some weird old man.
There was clearly no flirting going on. I mean, the boy's almost trying to get away, but he keeps engaging him in conversation. And you're right. Afterwards, he is just giddy and recounting to the cameraman about how he was, opening up himself to entertain the idea of being with him. Oh, it is so interesting. We should do like a Get Vocal and watch it and then discuss it with our people live.
That would be interesting. A watch party. Eek.
Right. Ooh.
So I encourage you, we're going to have a lot of references in the show notes about cognitive distortions, but those are the main ones. I mean, just really the idea is that it is an error in thinking, and the error only serves to reinforce beliefs about the activities that they are engaging in. I mean, Shiloh and I, and we've mentioned this before, we have worked with some individuals who have insight into what's going on. They have these drives and these desires. They are aware that they have these drives and desires. They are aware that they are wrong, and they are desperate to do something about them. But those are like probably less than a third of the ones that we had the opportunity to work with. Exactly. And who knows if the only reason they may have gotten there is because, they're in lifetime monitoring, they're in lifetime treatment. So they're trying to get on top of it. Let's talk about the role of fantasy. So fantasizing clearly plays a role in this particular discussion. And fantasy, look, one of the things that the studies that have been done in this area shows that fantasy in people who are not sex offenders has a completely different level of experience and engagement in regards to sexual arousal than it does for those that are offenders. And so the problem is in the domain of offenders and those that are, whether it's contact or non-contact, is that fantasy is a blueprint for offending, and fantasy becomes a rehearsal for the offending, and fantasy then becomes the means to achieving sexual arousal. And it enhances, that's where we actually do have some data showing that fantasy can have a direct line to causal offending. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And, this is a really interesting piece of research that could just be really, you could dive into it on its own. But I think when I relate it to online sex offenders, I think of how it completely perpetuates isolation for these individuals.
Yes.
Like you said at the top, like they're creating this own bubble where they feel like it's not reality. There are going to be no consequences, and they can just do their thing in it. And that's where the false sense of anonymity come in and things like that. I also see it as being a form as escapism, a really terrible coping skill for a lot of the negative emotions that we know are dynamic risk factors with these guys. If they already have low self-esteem or already aren't, socially apt where they can go out and engage in relationships with women, this becomes their coping skill to just hide out, engage in something that makes them feel good for a few minutes. And then that just gets reinforced.
Yeah, it's a fascinating line of inquiry. And like we said, I think we did pretty good staying on track today about this.
Yeah.
About these,
right.
Generally,
There's
we can go
ways.
off. Yeah, there are so many places it can go. So our colleague, we talked about this, I believe in our first season, our colleague, Jen Haley, who is a really accomplished writer, producer. She wrote on the first season of Mindhunter. And prior to getting into television writing, and she is currently still a playwright, Jen wrote an award-winning play called The Nether. And it's all about what we've been talking about today, which is the role of fantasy and the idea of if there was an outlet, such as like the argument is made for these images, would it therefore reduce the possibility of contact offenses?
Right, like a virtual reality world.
Right, which is what the play is about. So this play is basically sort of, I really felt like it was a precursor to Black Mirror. It's very Black Mirror. And as a stage play, it's really fascinating because you're looking at investigators who are investigating this virtual world on the deep dark web, where you have an implant or you have a headset that takes you in where you can abuse children. Now the twist here is that the individuals inhabiting the avatars of the children may not be real. They may be AI, or they may be other adults pretending to be children because that is their paraphilia.
Right.
So
Right.
is there really a crime happening here? And is this engaging in this activity keeping them from doing it in the real world? And I think that's a really big question
Yes.
that gets asked.
You can get the play on Amazon. It's a really quick read. I would our audience would love it.
Yeah, and there's actually if you Google or go to YouTube and put in The Nether, Nether, and Jen Haley, you'll get a couple of previews and of the play when Merritt Weaver from many shows, including Walking Dead and Studio 60 and a couple of recent movies. She's really great as the investigator.
I came across this study from 2009 where they looked at child pornography offenders and did some comparing and contrasting with offenders who act out in real life. And I thought this was so interesting, that played into this piece really well, was that child pornography offenders significantly identified with fictional characters
Right.
more than contact offenders did. And they scored really high on scales like fantasy and under assertiveness. So I think it helps us sort of paint a picture of who this person is or who they can become, as opposed to the sex offenders that are out there sort of walking in the world with us and coming in contact with their victims.
Which certainly was my experience and several of the people, because you know when you're an intern in a setting like Shiloh and I were, you would have a set of people that you saw individually for one-to-one sessions, and then you might also see that same person or that person and others that you saw one-on-one in a group setting, in a group therapy setting. And there was definitely, you really saw a difference in the personality types. I mean, those sort of, the ones that had no contact offenses but thousands of images were these people that were under assertive and lived, excuse me, and lived in these complete bubbles, you know, like almost your sort of
AKA mom's basement.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, like these guys that just living these isolated lives in mom's basement. And here's a gross example. I'm sorry that this grosses
I know
people
where
out,
you're
but
going.
but it's not uncommon. I'm not identifying anybody on this because it's very common, and it's actually made fun of in a South Park episode where these people become so addicted to being in the zone, in the flow of their virtual interactions in the computer world, that they start relieving themselves around their desk. So there would be investigators would come in and they'd say, yeah, we saw like 50 bottles of urine within, you know, because the person would relieve themselves because they didn't want to leave the computer, but then also never empty it. Like they just come back in and just crazy.
And maybe not just urine, other
Other
liquids as well. They would, the probation officers I worked with called them elimination jars.
Which also is very interesting, because then does that, I mean, you know, as gross as it is that also part of the collection thing?
Ooh,
You know, like this is part
know.
of me, and you can't differentiate between what needs to be thrown away, what needs to be kept, which then ties into the idea of hoarding. I mean, I don't want to do that research, but it'd certainly be an interesting.
No.
I don't want to research that at all.
Dissertation students out there need a topic. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to come back to this concept of the pathways of how people come to child pornography. And so the way that it sort of stands right now, and you know, this is still so new in a sense. I feel like with a lot of subsections of sex offenders, we always caution about how little research is out there, like with females, with juveniles. Online definitely falls into that category. But where it stands is that there's 3 different pathways. There are your pedophiles. And this is like, I remember one client clear as day saying, I was 70 years old when I bought my first laptop, and it was to find child pornography. Like it was A to B, like that was it, you know, like that direct of a pathway. So we do have that subsection there. But then there's also what we've been talking about is this discovery/curiosity group that either, like Scott so, well talked about, sort of the desensitization and how you're looking at deeper and darker stuff, or you see maybe a thumbnail of something that piques curiosity, and so you click on it and then it leads to something else. At any of those times, of course, somebody can stop their behavior and say, okay, I need to slow down. What am I doing here? What am I clicking on? And some people just don't have that urge control. But that is absolute. I've heard the story so much and in detail with that person's own experience that I do rule some of that out as just being an excuse. Now, do I hear people say that in group and then someone else clings onto it and goes, oh, I'm going to start using that as my excuse? Yeah, of course. But there's ways psychologically and with testing that we can sort of weed through this as well. And
You
then
know,
we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to give this example. I remember working with a deputy one time, and we were having this discussion. We were outside, and this deputy, she was a really heavy smoker, and which is very rare these days. Like a lot of like law enforcement does not smoke nearly as much as it used to because they can't really smoke on the job. They're not supposed to.
Right.
They might do dip or do packets or something, or patches or jewel or something. But here's somebody that's just smoking, and she's kind of rattling off. She's grossed out by the subject, which of course most people that aren't exposed to this world, and can't look at it clinically. You and I have developed the ability to sort of distance ourselves from it. And this is somebody who wasn't able to do that. And she's just going on and she's just puffing away. And then she lights up another one, like, I don't get it. And I said, well, what about your smoking? What about it? I said, well, you've lit up back to back 3 cigarettes while we've been having this discussion. And I said, I'm not offended by it. It's your choice, but that is an addiction, right? You can't stop it. Oh, well, I could stop. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm like, well, you're hurting yourself. You have 2
You're
kids.
hurting me because I'm talking to you.
Right. You've got kids. You could be putting your life at risk, and there's all these other things that could happen. And yet those are not deterrents for you to stop this behavior. And she couldn't get it. She could not get the parallel between sort of the disinhibition connected to the addictive behavior and the drive, the biology underneath that drives it.
Right. Yeah, that inability to control that urge in the right moment. Even for her, there's this clear-cut physical consequence. But yeah, I remember I worked with an offender, and this is kind of goes back to cognitive distortion. And it was so crazy because he said he remembers opening up the newspaper one day, and there was this big story of all of these people pretty locally who had been rounded up in this big investigation. And they had their pictures in there, and they were teachers and law enforcement officers and judges and, just everyone who had a high profile or career, which we would have a very adverse reaction to them being arrested for child pornography. They made examples out of them. And he said, I thought, that's who they're going to catch. They're never going to catch me.
Because that's a cognitive distortion.
Totally. And I'm like, you literally opened up a local newspaper and saw there was investigations going on, and that made you think the opposite? Because to some of us, if we were doing something even near that, we'd be like, oh shit.
Yeah.
This is like, yeah, too close to home. I better pump the brakes. But his mental gymnastics was, oh, they want the high profile people. They're not going to waste their time on me. And he had done tons and tons of treatment. He knew that, that was a distortion of his.
But that's interesting. But that's also bringing in another element to the distortion. There's the bias of like, well, I'm smarter.
Yes.
Or I'm not collecting 70,000 images. I've only got 99 images, and I wipe my drive every other day.
Right.
Yeah. Total cognitive distortion.
So the last pathway to child pornography is also what we have alluded to, is this compulsive collecting. Do you remember any specific examples of this, or anyone that stood out to you that?
Well, just what you were giving the example of is like, I remember one of the guys that I was on my caseload that I really, felt I had a lot of positive countertransference toward him, because I really saw him as sort of a sad sack and somebody that was a victim. And then, he went into euphoric recall about, the Angela series. And like, I never got to see the last 4 of the Angela series, and there were 12 in it. And it's like, oh, wow, that, we've been working for 6 months and you're still
Yeah.
in this place.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is I had a couple of clients to where it really felt like sort of the precursor to collecting was this sort of mentality of, I like a good challenge, and I like to see. I had one guy that was just like, I wanted to see what I could get my hands on that was on the internet that wasn't supposed to be out there. And he was kind of like a buck the system biker guy that was really smart. But he just was kind of computer savvy. And I remember he said, I found the psychiatrist, all of his records were on the internet somewhere, and I was able to get
Wow.
my hands on that. So for him, there was this challenge to it of, if he would see on a message board where someone would say, oh my God, doesn't it suck that like no one can find this image or this series anymore? It was such a like, cool, there's my next challenge. I'm going to see if I can hunt it down.
Mhm.
Um, and there's several other like psychological factors that, kind of came, where I came up with this formulation of like, that is what stimulated him. Now there also may be other elements there, but like he would also pass polygraphs about never masturbating to it. So, for me to be able to look at,
Yeah.
to put all these puzzle pieces together and go, what is going on here? Because at the end of the day, I want to know why they're sitting in front of me. What do I need to focus on? Do I need to focus on, okay, this is a pedophile whose sexual interest will never change, and here's how we keep him from offending
Right.
or reoffending in the same crime? Or is this someone that needs better decision-making skills, needs to work on their impulsivity, that needs to get this need for risky behavior met in other legal ways? Um, and hence the reason I loved this work, because it was like its own mini investigation for us to say what's going on here. And even when it comes to the worst of the worst, I don't agree with treating every sex offender, painting them all with the same brush.
Well, that's certainly, I mean, even if you're not coming from a place of compassion, we should be looking at it as a societal and cultural thing, because putting everybody in that same, that same group is not fair to anybody, and it causes more problems down the line.
Right, absolutely. So I think we should wrap it up here. I actually think we could go into a lot of information on internet solicitation, but maybe we'll save that for another episode, or we can do some sort of bonus episode with that. But this is a ton of information, and I know it's
Yeah.
not easy to listen to either, so I don't want to just drown out even more. But let us know if that's something you guys are interested in hearing, and we can definitely put that together for you.
And please join us for our Get Vocal discussion on this. I'm sure, log in, jump online, give us some questions, and we'd love to discuss this with you guys.
Yes, after this episode, you will hear a new little promo about Get Vocal. So listen to that and I'll give you all of the details. But it's so
All
good to
right.
be back.
It's good to be back, folks. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. We are not out of COVID yet. We may not be out of COVID for months. We are addressing issues of social justice that have long been unaddressed in this country within many existing systems, including law enforcement. Dr. Shiloh and I are keenly aware of that. Be safe, be aware, take care of each other. And we believe in you, our listeners. We know who our listeners are, and we are heartened by that. We're all in this together. And
we know it's hard right now. We know
it's very hard.
Everyone has their own personal journey they're going through. And we do have a lot of these more open, casual conversations on Get Vocal as they come up more in real time. So please join us there for that.
It's so good to be back. We will start up the rest of our year. We don't even call it seasons anymore, but we're going to be on a more regular show schedule and our casual discussions on Get Vocal. Look for us on social media. We've got some amazing merchandise coming up. Amazing merchandise. And we will see you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.
Bye,
Bye, folks.
Thank you.